Alrighty, so it looks like everybody is just about here. I do want to thank everybody so much for joining us tonight. We very much appreciate the support, and we are very excited to have both Alex and Jeffrey here with us. We are a local, Belmont Books is a local indie in a Boston suburb. We do ship all over the United States, and we very much thank you for your support of your local stores. If not us, those near you. I will be posting the link shortly to the events page where you can find any upcoming events for the store if you would be interested in following us with that. So tonight we have with us Jeffrey Lewis in conversation with Alex Beam. And Jeffrey is the author of the 4 novels of the Meritocracy Quartet, and he is also the winner of numerous literary awards as well as 2 Emmys, and he is also a TV writer-producer, and he last appeared with us for Belmont Books at his latest book, Bealport, A Novel of a Town. Tonight we are here with writer and journalist Alex Beam, and he is a retired columnist for the Boston Globe as of 2012, though he still does write with them to today. And he is the author of 2 novels as well as 5 nonfiction books, 2 of which were New York Times notables, and those are titled Gracefully and A Great Idea at the Time. And we welcome them for the launch of Jeffrey Lewis's new book titled The Land of Cockaigne. So I'll leave it to you guys to have at it with questions and interviews and whatnot. So.
All right, Kira, thank you very much. I'm going to take over now and talk for 45 minutes. Thank you. I'll extend Jeff's. Yes. Thank you to Belmont Books for launching Jeff's book. I'll start right in if I can. I'm a huge Jeff Lewis fan. I've read his last 4 novels. I like them all. I like this novel especially, The Land of Cockaigne. And Jeff, would you put us in the picture, as the British say? Would you just tell us what the book's about? And I know there's a short excerpt that you want to read, which is a pretty good setup.
Should I start with the setup? Maybe I should read. And
I was thinking, why don't you do like an elevator pitch, but like it's going to the 11th floor or something. So do the pitch first and then read the nice part.
In this book, the couple to whom you will be introduced in the first couple pages that I read arrive from far away in a small Maine town where they raise their son, who subsequently goes off to New York to work in public service in a diversionary program in a courthouse in the Bronx. He is murdered in the Bronx, and the book essentially is about how everyone connected to him deals with it.
Great, and I know that why don't you read that beautiful passage?
Sure, thank you. The arrival. In September, the bay freshens and the tourists go back to the cities, and there are days when the eagles come back and the air smells of burnt things and things beginning to die. These are days when heaven can wait and there are men in the woods practicing their guns, and on such a day, as if the shotgun blasts reverberating from Half-Bush Island to Caitlin's Point were fireworks for the dispossessed, the lonely, and those who have only just come home, Walter Rath and Catherine Gray sailed their white yawl by the head and through the channel and into Sneed's Harbor. She would stay and have her child there, and they would stay longer, and their child would go to school there, and after a while, they sailed down the coast on the yawl less. They weren't the sort of people ever to say they were happy for whispers of the gods and retribution, but others said it for them and of them, as if the little village past the channel had landed a special prize. She went by Charlie. People had always called her Charlie. The computers and all of it had reached the village, and it wasn't long before who Walter Rath was known, and nods went his way and Charlie's. She was pregnant then, and that was part of it too. She was even prettier when she was pregnant, which was saying something. It was said, though there was no one at the post office or in the store then who'd seen her when she wasn't. She was fit and wore all the gifts, and her honey hair had the girls of Sneed's talking of salons they would never see. Even her posture, the way she held tall, carrying that child, as if it was weight she'd been born for. And in the store, they talked of Walter Rath's money. No one knew, and it was all a guess. Once you talked in millions or billions, it was all the same anyway. Words lost their gravity and floated by. Not a little envy was stirred, or it could have been plain dirt fear that he would take his marbles back west or buy up the town, or his cronies would come in and the prices of everything would go up. The cronies never arrived, and then there came the thought that Walter Rath didn't have them, that he was some kind of lone gunner from a world where there were things stronger and bigger than guns. The truth, in any of it, was that Walter Rath had gone out there when the valley was young, and when there were boys still in their garages, and there'd been no one in a suit and a tie who picked the winners better than he did. He'd picked jobs, more than a couple of others, and then he was on television, the honored guest, the sage of San Jose, and punters in Duluth or Tallahassee would tune in to listen to who he was touting next. And he was done with all of it, so that he was gone almost before the whole thing was up and running crazy big and spoken of with reverence. He was an early one. He'd left money on the table. And he'd met Charlie by then, who'd been around the valley herself and with some of the boys too, in her own fashion, the it girl of the valley for a while, and they'd both had enough. He bought the Concordia in Monterey Bay where it was rare, and they sailed until they couldn't or wouldn't anymore. When they saw Sneed's Harbor on the chart, Charlie said, "What a funny name." Stop there.
Right. That's a kind of incredibly beautiful opening where you have a white yacht named the Concordia is sailing down the channel into a place with a strange name in Maine, Sneed's Harbor. I loved your previous novel, Bealport, as you know, and in this novel also, you there's many themes, but certainly a deep chord that you've written about is the interplay between so-called people from away, of whom you are one. You're a Los Angeles resident who spends a lot of time in Castine, Maine, and the locals, for better or worse. Can you start by talking about that relationship and why it interests you?
Well, it partly interests me because I'm part of it. And it's something that I've experienced over 30 years now. Something I know about. I'm terribly unsuccessful, excuse me, at writing about things I don't know about or don't know quite intimately. I find not drama in the relationship between people from away and old-time Mainers, but I find the occasional possibility for drama. It all depends, but I believe that my books, the last two in particular, have found occasions for that, although also Adam the King, which I wrote much earlier. That's the possibilities for drama are exacerbated now or enhanced now, whichever you would say, by the increasing plague of the country, I suppose you'd say, which is the vast inequality in resources and ease of life between people who've so-called made it and people who haven't yet or may never. And that is, although that phenomenon is not by any means universal among the people from away versus old timers in Maine. It's not universal at all. But in terms of drama, it presents interesting, concerning possibilities.
Right. I mean, I think to continue to go overboard in praising your work, I mean, your work is actually quite subtle, and it's more about tensions rather than dramas. Although this book has a dramatic ending, and you've alluded to the fact that the spark, in a way, that starts this play is obviously the tragic and unforeseen death of the protagonist's son. You mix in a third world here. I mean, pretty boldly, right? You have the world of the people from away who have yachts. You have the world of Mainers who live in Maine. At one point, you say, you sort of, with your tongue partly in cheek, you say they need 3 jobs to get by. It's no joke. But you're also
living, I think, is the low. 3 jobs for 1 living, I think, is the local.
3 jobs for 1 living. But you've also, you have a third, if it were a play, you have a third company, you have a third cast on stage, which are young, advanced teen, 18 and 19-year-old African Americans from the Bronx, who sort of invade this bucolic part of Maine. That's a poor choice of verb, but how did you, what's your comfort level, in a sense, describing that culture?
Well, I suppose in the current cultural climate, which is a fluid cultural climate, I would actually say, scared like crazy. I mean, there are people all around, I think, ready to jump on me and any other person who looks like, roughly speaking, a Caucasian who has a Black or Latino characters in their book. At the same time, these kids, whom I really like, were absolutely essential to the telling of the story. There was no way around it. And it seems to me a fundamental tenet of even the possibility of an open society, that you can't just write about people who are the same so-called or supposed race as yourself. So my comfort level is not great. But do I think it's the proper course? And do I think without people like myself or others, African Americans for that part, writing about people who are of other races than myself, I think we're quite doomed. I think we're then as balkanized as the worst naysayers are now saying. Let me add one other thing here, Alex, which is that some years ago, plenty years ago, if the truth be known, nonetheless, not too long after law school, I was an assistant district attorney in Manhattan for just a few years. It was my sort of one law job I ever had. And of course, I was exposed to the entire panoply of the criminal justice system and its participants in New York. So it's not like I felt entirely without justification or confidence or knowing nothing at all about what I was writing. In this book, as in my others, with one exception, which was set 400 years ago, pretty much I've only written about people I've had at least some kind of firsthand feeling about, if not known personally.
Right, it's a reference to Escalante's Dream, a book I also read, a novel by you. I couldn't remember, it takes place in the 17th and 16th.
Inquisitor's Diary.
Oh, excuse me. My friend David Roberts wrote Escalante's Dream, Inquisitor's Diary. Yes, that you're certainly, in terms of authenticity, you're projecting yourself many centuries.
I would say about the Inquisitor's Diary, at least, though, it did have a lot of Jews in it. And I felt like I had some proprietary rights in that area.
Yeah, I don't think the Jews didn't always come off that well with the inquisitors. I had on this the question of authorial authenticity. I've never forgotten. Decade or so ago, I read an account in the Yale Alumni Weekly by a young thriller writer named Alex Berenson, who's since become notorious, but that's not important. But a reader once challenged him. He said, when you write about your character being in the lobby of the Central Intelligence Agency, it seems very real, but I know you've never been to the CIA. And Berenson answered his reader with the famous story about two men trying to outrun an angry bear, and one turns to the other and said, God, we're gonna have to run really fast. And the other one says, I only have to run faster than you. I don't have to run faster than the bear. So I find all your writing extremely convincing. I mean, and I mean that as praise, but I'm not, I wouldn't accuse you in a sense of, not having lived every life that's in your books.
I would, overall, I would say I do an astonishingly small amount of research for any book I write. I feel mostly like a phony when I try to do research and fill things in. I'm not averse to doing research kind of to bolster my memory, because my memory stinks at this point. But I don't have the inner capacity that I feel is necessary to write, at least for myself, of believing what I'm writing if I simply looked it up. I just don't. It seems to me like, well, I had to look it up mostly, and I don't want to be a purist about it, but mostly somebody else ought to write it. Somebody who was there, somebody who was on the scene in some fashion. And in a way, that's a limiting factor in this book and in other books I've written. You've observed in other conversations that most of my books are not very long. And that's true. And one way of understanding that is that I run out of things that I know about a situation. And I'm really not comfortable with the prose, with the actual prose, word by word, with stuff that's a little farther from anything I've lived. It just makes me feel like I'm cheating somebody. It shouldn't, but I could go on and say, because I've tried to think about this lately, that the way I write, and it may be the way lots of other people write, is I feel like I step back. I have some capacity, however small, to step back from both my imagination and my memory, so that in a sense, I simply try to record what is there. I try to be that person or that entity or that bit of consciousness which observes what is in my imagination and memory, and be true to that, such that I'm really making a record not only of the world, but of my response to the world, in the hopes that at least nobody else is going to write that.
Yeah, and I mean, I found that very interesting, especially when, I mean, I know we've talked, and of course it's a juvenile obsession of mine, that you write short novels, and that's a side. But what you were saying there, what I was hearing you say for a moment, which really interested and inspired me, was that I was hearing you saying that you're writing out of your imagination, which for a quote unquote real writer is of course the purest place from which to write.
I was trying to make a distinction, and I'm not sure it's valid. It's not so much that I am writing from my imagination as I am trying to write from a place where I'm simply observing my imagination at work. In other words, there is something behind both imagination and memory, which is trying to make a record of, as though my memory and my imagination are like photographic plates on which certain impressions have been made. And my writing is the effort simply to record that. I'm not sure that makes sense.
That's okay. I mean, it probably makes more sense than my.
What it does, Alex, is it begins to explain what's not in a lot of my books, and reasons that they are shorter perhaps than some other people's books. One is, I don't describe a terribly large number of things or people in my books at great length. I try to describe those things which have made an impression on my memory or imagination. What I don't try to do is gear up my imagination to say a bunch of things. Just, why aren't I able to observe this person more closely than appears in the book? Well, I don't know, but I just didn't. So I'm not going there. I'm not going to force my imagination to say things that it wasn't impressed by when whatever it is that happened occurs to me as worthwhile to write. That makes sense?
Yeah, look, what you're saying makes much more sense than my interventions, but I'm going to make one more intervention.
Sure.
I'm listening. I find what you're saying very interesting when you talk about the interaction of imagination and memory as maybe photographic plates. The word I feel like you're not crediting yourself for is fiction. I mean, you are creating fictional worlds.
Sure.
Let's limit ourselves to this one book, which is bleeping great and people should buy it. But this is a fictional world.
Yeah.
And it's a world that you created. And I would argue, I mean, I don't want to, sure, I understand what memory is. And I understand that you remember meeting a guy with a nice boat over in the inlet that's not called Sneed's. And okay, I get it. But fictional works of the imagination are triumphs when they're good. And I'm throwing that up against your wool gathering.
Let me, that's a smart, I mean, that's true. Everything you're saying is true. I side only as a writer. I guess I'm of a certain age that I can still believe when J.D. Salinger writes about phonies that I don't want to be one of them. And that may be another version of what I'm saying. Yes, I take responsibility for the fictional world, but what I'm trying to say about the fictional world that I create is that it is a record of things that not simply if it was simply my memory, yes, then it probably wouldn't be fiction, but a combination of my memory and imagination, of my consciousness. I'm trying to find, to be in that place where I can weed out stuff that doesn't honestly make an impression on my imagination. That doesn't mean the imagination hasn't done its work of transforming the world into something new. I hope it has. But what it does mean is that I'm not in there I don't feel when I'm writing. I'm actually in there fighting the battle to figure out, should that hat be pink or blue? If it doesn't pop out, I don't tell you whether it's pink or blue.
That's okay. I'm going to completely switch subjects briefly, although I really regard, before I did switch subjects, I mean, fiction's the senior service. I wish more non-writers understood how how nonfiction, which I essentially write, is easy and fiction is hard. And anyway, I appreciate your comments about writing fiction. I think they're insightful, and there's a lot of self analysis in there. People, I hope people appreciate how hard it is to do well, and you do it very well. But
thank you,
yeah.
Howard. Really.
Let me just ask a different kind of question. Although I just want to say, I mean, so I've known you for a few years, and I asked like a year ago or something. I said, you know, are you writing something? And you said you actually sent me a PDF of a novel, this novel called The Land of Cockaigne, and you know, I'm a person on the street. Now, I assumed that this had something to do with cocaine. So, like, forgive me for being an idiot, but that's okay. But the title is, first of all, you'll have to explain the title.
Sure.
And second of all, wait, I'm still raving here. And I mean, it's utterly fascinating, I guess, the place of the title, I think, inside the personality of one of the protagonists, Walter Rath.
Yeah. If the first question, let me, I think there are probably multiple questions in there. How I came up with that title. As far as I know, I thought it was a good title. I like the title. I like the phrase. I like the phrase Land of Cockaigne. I didn't know how to pronounce it. I hear you pronouncing it Land of Cocaine, and that's perfectly valid. I actually Googled after I settled on the title. I suddenly realized if anybody asked me what I'd written, I wouldn't know how to say the title necessarily because I'd never heard it in person. I only read about it. And I Googled, and other people could do this as well. And you know how in Google they have people who will pronounce something that you ask them to pronounce? There's about 3 or 4 different pronunciations in there. And of course, it's a French word, medieval French word. I settled on cockaigne only because it looks like a cock to me. I mean, at the beginning of it, and I was a little embarrassed to have it just be exactly the same as the drug. Although I hope that people would sense some kind of relation in choosing the title. Now, having said all that, I should explain what the Land of Cockaigne is. There was a medieval legend, perhaps embodied in a poem or song, but quite famous anyway, particularly, I guess, in France or in the French-speaking countries, of a sensual paradise on earth, a peasant's dream, really, embodying everything a medieval a European peasant might hope for in life. No work, food falling out of the sky, easy, universally available sex. What are some other things? All kinds of money, drunkenness, a lot of drunkenness. All of these, a way of spending the day without doing a damn lick of work, which of course would have been pretty much the opposite of how most people had to live, because most people were living, working all day, every day. Anyway, Bruegel did a painting of imaging that word, and actually it's come to, I think actually in The Joy of Cooking, the first Joy of Cooking, the woman who wrote the first Joy of Cooking put her favorite recipes as cockaigne. I think she put an asterisk and said cockaigne or something like that with respect to them, something like that. And it's come down. There's an American song sung by Pete Seeger called Big Rock Candy Mountain. It was sung by somebody before Pete Seeger. I just don't know who it was before my time. But a really good song, and it embodies everything that the Land of Cockaigne represents. Now, do I have to say how it winds up in this book, or is that left?
I don't know if it's inside baseball or not, but I mean, maybe when I read it and when I just reread it, it's crazy. It is actually kind of a plot point.
Sure.
Because Walter, the male protagonist, it's a flash for him. I mean, it happens to it was in his college dorm room, but that's not, I don't know. Answer the question how it works for Walter if you want to.
In a way, and this will be open to a reader's interpretation, but the deceased son of Walter and Charlie apparently expressed a wish, as told to them by his girlfriend, that wouldn't it be great if we brought up a bunch of these kids, my clients from the Bronx, and just set them down on the coast of Maine for a couple of weeks and treated them essentially like princes. Like they wouldn't have to lift a finger. They wouldn't be obliged to show any ambition of any kind. They wouldn't be judged in any fashion. They would simply be able to lie around. If they wanted to sleep 20 hours a day, they could sleep 20 hours a day and eat lobster the rest. It would simply be a world of where they became the stars. And instead of even among those who would be help them and be sympathetic towards them, have expectations about them. In hearing his son's wish, Walter Rath's spontaneous response, and Walter Rath is a student of history, was land of Cockaigne. Charlie, his wife, says something like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And he explains briefly. That's how that notion enters this book.
Right. It's funny, you know, as I was doing some rereading and sort of preparing these somewhat obvious questions about how you have the three tribes that we've already discussed, people from away, local Mainers, and then the unusual arrival of young people from the Bronx. I mean, you also, this isn't a question, but I need to put on the table that, you know, you have a really richly imagined, I mean, the other story that's really well done in this book, and is certainly hard to do, is the story of the mature marriage of Walter and Charlie. And I realize, I mean, I make no apologies for the superficial nature of my reading, but of course I couldn't conclude, I couldn't tell the audience which is the more important story, although they're both beautifully told. I'm wondering, and I mean, of course I know the ending, I just looked at it a second time. I'm wondering, would you feel interested in commenting on the nature of those two stories and which one might be more important?
I'd be a fool to say which is more important. I think, in that I really feel like readers will know for themselves which is more important. Having said I'd be a fool, probably the marriage. You know, that's where the human heart really ticks. That's where I got started in this book. Although there were other forces at play, parenthetically, something which may or may not come up in your questions, but one of them was the terrible comments of the governor of Maine, who was then governor of Maine in 2016, when he announced that he was against basically all these sellers of drugs coming up with names like DeMoney and Smoothie and Shifty, coming up from places like New York and Connecticut, selling their drugs, and then before they left, getting some white girl pregnant. These were his words, which then created another problem which they had to deal with down the road. Those words, I thought, in one sense, are ludicrous on their face. I mean, they were ludicrous in his particular descriptions, but underlying his particular descriptions, of course, there were things you could understand to be a common perception or common prejudice or whatever. But one could also see how hurtful they would be, how hurtful those words might be to certain people. And I think that's another important story in the book.
Right. I mean, I know many people watching us. So, I mean, those words were spoken by Paul LePage, the former governor of Maine, who gave birth to, I believe, to ranked choice voting in the state. Was elected with a significant minority, not a majority of votes, and the rest is history. He's been telling the Boston.
Jared Golden.
Yes, that's how you got Jared Golden in Maine too. He's been telling the Boston Globe he's going to come back north, but I mean, it's probably been telling a lot of other people too, frankly.
It appears to be running again, yeah.
Wow, yeah, well, we're not here to talk about that. Thank heavens. I actually had an interesting exchange a week or two ago with someone a little bit like you. And he was someone who had some screen credits. I mean, he did not have the screen credits you have, the Emmy Awards and the years of writing for a successful television show, Hill Street Blues. And I'm going to ask you whether you want to, those are two different kinds of writing, and you chose to enter a second vocation in a way. Writing for serial television, you left that vocation. You actually then ripped off a quartet or a tetralogy. I'm not quite sure which it is. I mean, you went into a very the deep end of the pool, writing prose fiction. And how's the craft different?
Well, in the most obvious, in the crassest way, writing fiction's a lot. You have to know a lot more to write fiction. You have to know a lot more about something. You're dependent only on yourself. If you are writing for television, say, at least in the manner that I was, first of all, some fellow writers both to commiserate with and to exchange ideas with and to fill out plots with and to come up with unusual phrases with, to have some jokes with, in truth, and to have somebody to go out to lunch with. You had, that is a kind of fundamental, more, in personal terms, a more fundamental difference than you would imagine without having experienced it. I mean, I love the people I work with on Hill Street and elsewhere in Los Angeles. Some great people. And when I write fiction, here I am all alone, and I'm waiting half the time, checking the clock to see if it's lunchtime yet, so I can go out and see one of them, and get away from this lonesome occupation. Another almost equally crass and obvious thing is, to write fiction, you need to know a lot more. You really only, you have to depend on your own resources. There are no actors to fill in what you didn't know. You can't write to an actor. That's the, and people who write film and TV do this all the time. They say, oh, blah blah is in this. Well, I know what he's like, people write to actors all the time, and particularly in long-running television shows, because of course, very often the actors on TV, their range is not immense. What they can do is fabulous, but the range might be limited. You want to write to that range, or you want to write to the range of the character, at least that's established. So you have actors to help you, directors to help you, set designers, location managers to find places that look better than anything you could describe. All that really makes things easier. What makes things harder for a person like myself, at least when I was doing it, was that I never felt entirely that I was unburdening my heart, if you want to take a, make a sentimental, slightly sentimental way of saying it, of those things that impelled me to want to be a writer in the first place. I mean, I had gone to law school. I could have been a lawyer, I guess. I mean, the thought horrified me, but I could have done it. What other people do. The chief reason I didn't was I felt maybe I had some things to say, even when I was young, and it would be kind of not the most honorable way to live my life, not to at least attempt. I mean, even given the likelihood of failure, and I understood the likelihood of failure to be substantial, although when I was young, maybe I didn't appreciate that likelihood as much as when I got somewhat older. Anyway, all that is to say that I got lucky in TV and got lucky enough so that I could retreat and try to write the things that actually I had hoped and kind of set out to write when I was actually quite a bit younger and before I ever wrote for TV. Basically, my move from New York to Los Angeles was one that a lot of other people have done the same thing. I was broke and looking around for which alternatives might provide me some semblance of a middle-class life, which came to kind of I think was not a bad thing in life. LA was it.
Yeah, that's the theme of Wallace Stegner's novel, The Big Rock Candy Mountain, people who, which flows from the folk song that you mentioned, people going west to make their living.
Yeah.
Why? I know. What? I don't associate your work with your prose fiction work with writing about Los Angeles, where you do spend half your life. Why is Maine so lucky?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not sure I can answer it entirely. I would point out that theme song for an old show, my third book, is set entirely in Los Angeles and says almost everything I know about Los Angeles. So I may have run out of stuff. While it's true, I've now, if I total it all up, have lived in Los Angeles probably half my life. I was a New Yorker this time. I was born in Manhattan, and I don't think I ever entirely got past the idea that I'm stuck with being an Eastern guy no matter what I do. And it's not like I don't like California. There were, shall we say, years of adaptation, but now I'm actually quite willing to stick up for it when I see the New York Times bashing it, as it regularly does. But in the end, I feel like I'm one of these guys with khaki pants and sort of baggy pants and walking around and kind of, went to the Ivy League schools and that was it. That kind of, if not it, that did some shaping in a way that I'd be kind of again, a Salinger-esque phony to deny.
Yeah, you're one of the least phony guys I know. I mean,
I
speaking
work
as,
at not.
pardon me?
I work at not, I guess.
Yeah, I'm no stranger to phoniness, but yeah, I apologize. I haven't, you wrote 4 novels, which lumped under which are published as a quartet, the Meritocracy Quartet, of which
Right.
I've read only one. Right? Is that right? I'm sorry.
You're asking me.
It looked like you were going to interrupt me. Isn't that
It's not.
yeah, anyway, and I know the problem is I didn't read the one set in Los Angeles, which is probably why I asked that question. And I really enjoyed your previous novel, Bealport, which is a lot like this. I was trying to remember. I got the impression that Bealport, Maine is an inland town. Maybe I'm misremembering. But in any case, it's also a really practiced grasp of Maine. It's quite beautiful and quite perfect. A lot like this book. It occurred to me to cynically ask, are you working on the Cockaigne quartet? Are you gonna
No.
are you gonna stay in Maine?
Actually, the book that I have now finished, which is yet anybody to be shown to anybody, and it's always possible if I read it over tomorrow, nobody ever will read it aside from me. But the one that I believe I've finished is set in Greece, very briefly in Philadelphia, and then again in Los Angeles. So there, more than Greece though, more in Greece than any place else. And you say, well, why Greece? And I taught in Greece for a while, I mean, a year really, between college and law school, and loved the place and went back frequently. And our family now has more elaborate connections to the place, which brings back there from time to time. In particular, my daughter met her husband on the same Greek island that I visited when I was young. And his family have Italian restaurants on that island, and we all love them and are eager to go back. And my daughter and her husband are there most summers, or her husband every summer. And so in a way, it's a third rail has the wrong connotation, but it's another angle on my life.
I see. I mean, we should try to, you will show that manuscript to someone, won't you?
Yeah, I may show it to you, watch out.
Do you have this awkward situation where your wife is your first reader?
Sometimes, most of the time.
Okay.
I don't think I can't recall if I've even showed it to her yet. I finished a draft of it just as COVID hit. So that's a year and a half ago now. And I've written almost nothing since. And I haven't found what to write, I guess, is the truth. And also, I feel a little bit ahead of the game, having a book, and actually 2 books, because there's another one back there that I haven't showed pretty much to anybody. Feeling a little bit ahead of the game. I'm feeling a little bit lethargic as well. as though, oh, I ran a good race, now I'm going to rest a bit, and let the others catch up for, Bugs Bunny, out racing the hare and having her rest and waiting for the hare to catch up. I remember from a childhood record of mine.
Yeah, you've got some chips saved up. I mean, a lot of writers would envy you.
Yeah, and so, but one result is a kind of lethargy, and it could be more than lethargy. I don't know. I mean, COVID has been, for me as well as I know for many others, a terrible distraction, and one I haven't even imagined to write about. Although I understand Gary Steingart recently, or last week or something, published a novel that did, and I admire him for it. But to me, it seems like, oh, what the hell could I say about COVID when there's 7 billion people have experienced the same damn thing? Well, anyway, I guess,
Yeah,
I guess
I
I've
think
been very much part of a world community the last year and a half without any particular purchase on it.
a famous fax went out from New York publishers about 14 months ago to agents saying, don't send us your COVID manuscripts. Because of course, every writer in Brooklyn was churning out a COVID manuscript. And yes, I noticed that Steingart, more power to him.
More power to him, I say the same thing.
He got to the top of the pile. Hang on, let me just, I don't, we have a couple of questions here. I don't know if Kira's coming back. Someone in the audience says, tell him about your OJ obsession, but which one of us has an OJ obsession? Jeffrey, do you have an OJ obsession?
No, but I did write an OJ story or two at some point.
Can you talk about that?
I actually, well, yeah, I'm trying to remember the story, but when something like this, because where we live in Los Angeles is in Brentwood, is actually, we're actually quite close to both where OJ lived and where Nicole, his victim, apparently lived. And because the supposed knife, which would have proved one thing or another, was never found, I was in a position to kind of closely examine the geography involved in that murder case. And actually, as I'm having a hard time remembering, but somehow the character in the story becomes obsessed with finding the knife and figuring out where the knife might be and in which dumpster and so on. And so that's the extent of my OJ obsession. And I don't think anybody else, until I just said this, would know or have known that I even wrote such a story. So I don't know. I don't think it's me. It must be you, Alex.
No, I'm sure it's you, because I know who asked the question, and I think it's someone more familiar with. Did you publish that story?
No, I don't think so. I might have sent it to, did I send it someplace? I don't remember.
Yeah, Tim Thompson asked that question.
I don't remember. I do have a collection of short stories, which have a couple of which were published in small magazines, that are basically set in either Brentwood or Ocean Park in California. I mean, if this subject hadn't come up, I wouldn't have even remembered that I had those stories, but I wrote them, virtually all of them, before I wrote Meritocracy, a Love Story, my first published novel.
What's the name of the collection?
Sorry?
What's the name of your collection?
West of the 405.
Really?
Yeah. So,
is it rare, or can you give me a copy?
I don't know if it's digitized. I'd have to see if I have well, that's.
I want a hard copy. I'll go on Abe Books. I'll buy one for like $45 or something.
Oh no, hold it. This is not stuff that is seen. I mean, you may find one in some Missouri Review or something, or some other, literary mag, but these have not seen much light of day. But I would be happy if they did. It seems to me they're a little perhaps out of date now in a kind of way, as to say they were written about life in on the west side of Los Angeles a little more than somewhere around 20 years ago. So,
Gotcha.
and since that life may have evolved in ways I'm not clear about, they may feel a little old, but maybe not. I'd love it if people read them.
But I'd like to read. I'll try and get a hold of the collection. I should tell your friend I was famous in 1.5 zip codes because we started a feature called This Week in OJ News in Boston.
Oh, there.
So perhaps I wouldn't call it an obsession, but someone was so intrigued with it, they recently revisited it. Actually, it was really funny, and it was denounced. It was denounced in Boston by serious-minded people, which obviously made it much more rewarding.
I think you've now won the OJ prize. Although if I could put in, it was only 2 or 3 weeks ago, sitting around outside here with some other people, the subject of OJ came up, and chiefly in the context of the two people who had ever met him, me and this other guy who'd met him much more, were basically going, what a nice guy he was, you know.
Wait a minute, there's only 2 minutes left. How did you meet OJ?
I met him exactly once because we were shooting on a street in Brentwood, which turned out to be right in front of his house. He came out to shoot, talk the time of day. And I actually was partners in a TV project with a guy who was his best friend, a guy and his girlfriend who were OJ's really best friends and staunchest defenders. But I wasn't part of that, but I did know well what somebody who I believe was virtually his best friend or most loyal.
Got it. Can I squeeze in a last question, Kira, or what? You tell me.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say we do have another question. Well, first, Robert would like to say, Jeff, it was great to see you and to learn about this project. And he thinks that Pre-Seeger the version was by Burl Ives. And Neil Fine would like to know, have you ever written about high school in Rochester?
I have tried. I may try again. And I remember Neil Fine, and tell him if I could write anything, I'd want to write it about the history teacher, Phil Benjamin.
Was he a teacher in Rochester, or the history teacher in Rochester?
At our high school in Rochester.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, I'm just sort of curious, I know you've been reviewed in Maine. How does Maine receive you as a writer?
Maine is, in a literary sense, Maine is a very cosmopolitan and sophisticated place. I mean, if there was a time in the country where people said half the writers in the country were in Montana, it may be that the other half wound up in Maine. And people here in the press here have treated me very generously, really.
Good.
And have quite frequently, helped along whatever I've been doing.
That's great. Okay.
Well, to wrap up, I would like to thank you both so much for joining us tonight. I found tonight's event to be both thought-provoking and insightful, and I found the process of your novel to be very interesting. And Alex, I appreciated your questions. They were very well-rounded, and they definitely helped to create a better understanding of both literature as well as Jeff's writing.
Thank you.
And as a reminder that I've posted the links to our events page in the chat, as well as the link to tonight's specific event where you can purchase a copy of Jeffrey's new book, Land of Cockaigne, directly from the website. And As well as that, there is a book shortage at the moment, so please keep that in mind to order books for yourself or for your loved ones in advance as that happens. So thank you again so much, guys, for joining us. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
everybody's
Thank
support.
you,
Thank you,
Belmont,
Kara.
for having me again. Thank you, Alex. You were great. I really appreciate it. Really do.
All
I hope
right.
to see you guys again.
It's a great book. Congratulations, Jeff. It's
Thank you.
fantastic. Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Night night.